when we talk to leaders, we try to expand their aperture a little bit to look at complexity that way and say, like, we've got to think about how do we change people's mindsets about a problem or, a vision that we're trying to cast or whatever the kind of change that we're trying to make, so that we can then organize them differently in groups, so that we can then cause the whole organization to operate differently.
What will you do to unlock innovation? In today's fast-paced world, innovation might not be enough. Tomorrow's pioneers of change will need to be agile, able to adapt, and committed like never before. Your host, Sanna Vinding, invites you to listen in and join business leaders from around the world as they share their visions for success in our future business challenges.
Welcome to Mind Innovation. I'm your host, Sanna Vinding. I'm always excited to learn. And in today's podcast, we're going to talk about how do we change and how do we innovate? And that innovation requires change management. I want to welcome Caleb Gardner. He's a digital strategist with unique professional experience. He's a founding partner at 18 Copies, which is a strategy innovation firm focused on intersection of technology and culture. So welcome to the podcast, Caleb.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah. So let's jump in here, right? So organizations can't change if leaders can't change with them.
That's right.
Yeah. So what do we do?
Well, I mean, it requires thinking about change on multiple different kinds of levels. And when you start studying things like complexity, which I got really into when I was writing my book, you realize that we are really systems upon systems, right? Like we are individuals with our individual motivations and biases interacting with each other in groups interacting with each other in organizations interacting with each other in society. Like it really is mind blowing when you start thinking about it like that.
Yeah.
And so when we talk to leaders, we try to expand their aperture a little bit to look at complexity that way and say, like, we've got to think about how do we change people's mindsets about a problem or, a vision that we're trying to cast or whatever the kind of change that we're trying to make, so that we can then organize them differently in groups, so that we can then cause the whole organization to operate differently. Yeah. And if you think about an organization as a social construct, which we don't get that a lot when we're talking about business every day. We talk about financials, we talk about org charts, we talk about all these things that exist basically just on paper. Yeah. But organizations are social constructs. They exist because we all agree to behave in specific ways. So if we can get everyone to all agree to behave in different ways, that's how change actually gets made.
Yeah. But so how does change get made now that with this big, I'll call it also like disruption, right? Now we're hybrid, we're not hybrid, we're in the office, now we're not in the office. How does that affect everything?
Yeah, it requires a lot more intentionality for one thing, right? I mean, I think that a lot of people underestimated how much being in the office and being around each other reinforced cultural boundaries in ways that we didn't realize that they were reinforced just by the serendipitous interaction every single day. And for better and for worse, I think it has some positive side effects and some negative side effects. We don't have that reinforcement of in-person interaction in a remote environment, and we have it less in a hybrid environment. And so it means we have to be a lot more intentional about how we communicate with each other and how we, communicate our intentions around productivity. Like, here's what I'm doing today. Communicate our needs to our managers or managing up to the people that, will decide our career paths. Yeah. Communicating where we don't have clarity, right? Like it used to be really easy and not as embarrassing to just kind of walk over to your colleague and say, hey, did you catch that? Did you catch it? I don't really get what
now you're talking about. First and saying, can I call you because I have a question?
Which is like a form of documentation, right? Like you put something in Slack or an email, all of a sudden you're putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot. There's a different level of, intentionality, but also just like shame that could come along with it. Like it's a whole different dynamic.
Yeah, now it's vulnerable, right? To suddenly,
100%.
It's easier to go to somebody and just saying, "Hey," right? Yeah,
right.
No traceability on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What are some? And I think already you're touching it. So, what are some of the biggest trends you're seeing affecting the workplace right now?
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely already touching on it. I mean, one that I think is related to that, that's super important is in this time where the labor market is so tight and employees actually have a lot of power to be able to negotiate what they want from a salary or benefits or otherwise standpoint.
Yeah.
You're actually seeing people use the breakdown of some of those cultural norms as negotiating points. And they're basically saying, hey, that monolithic office culture when we went into an office, it didn't really work for me. You know, like I didn't really fit that mold. I tried to pretend like I did when I was there, but actually I'm from a community that is somewhat marginalized, or I come from a culture that is different, or, you know, I didn't really feel like I fit in. And so I need XYZ in order to be supported and be successful. And
Yeah.
so those conversations are starting to rise a lot more in this kind of environment. And it's actually super interesting because I think there's an opportunity here to like build more equitable workplaces when
Yeah.
employees have that much more power and much more leverage over their employers, who are desperate in a lot of ways to get them back working in person.
Yeah.
I don't always feel like the case for working in person is strong. Like sometimes it's just, we know magical things happen when you're in the office. It's like, no, there's a lot of like, we don't, that's not enough, right? Like we need to know, why is this part of my job need to happen in the office? Why does this part of my job need to happen? Like, can this part of my job happen remotely? Like there needs to be a use case there beyond just, we want everyone in the same place because we think you're more productive.
And it shakes up the process, right? Just saying, this is how we've done it all the time. If you have a meeting or a group meeting or an ideation or something, but it 100%. Gives just a foundation now to say, but let's do it differently and then see what the outcomes is. But you have to be bold to do it as well.
Yeah,
and take that risk, right? But there are companies out there that's doing that. I wanted to hear if you had some example of, of change management failures, and maybe we have to go a little bit back, right? Or maybe you have something that really fresh from your desk, but if you could share something.
Change management failures. I mean, there's so many more change management failures than there probably are successes. Yeah. I mean, there's a McKinsey study that gets widely shared in my circles, and it's honestly, it started, I think it was like 10 years old, but they recently refreshed it, that said 70% of all corporate transformations fail to achieve their
I saw
objectives.
that one.
And it doesn't mean that necessarily they weren't 100% successful, or that they didn't have some, level of success in their transformation. It just means we put these objectives on paper and we didn't reach all of them. But it does, the reasons why it's not successful are always consistent. It's like, we didn't get enough people involved in the process, especially the people who are going to be most engaged in the change. It's going to affect their job the most. We didn't communicate enough. We didn't train people well enough.
So why don't we learn if it's been that for so many years? Right.
Well, that's what's so fascinating about the moment that we're in with the pandemic, is that we talked about the future of work for how many years, like years and years. I feel like we've been talking about the future, quote unquote, of work since I've been in the workforce. And yet we didn't realize how stagnant the actual work culture had become. Like the pandemic was the first real catalyst to say, oh, these were our assumptions about work that were based on norms, not necessarily anything that was of value. And so the last couple of years have been having this fascinating conversation about if work is divorced from a place, what does it actually need to look like? Like what's important about it? I think it's really interesting the moment we're in.
Yeah. But will it take that some companies will just say, we're going back to the structure we had before. It's in the office. And then there will be companies that saying, okay, this is an opportunity. We're doing it and we will be bold, So do you think the market will there be like a big change? So there will be the companies down here, and then there will be the one that actually are leaping and doing amazing stuff. Some of them maybe will failure. It's not that, but how do you think it will look like, that landscape?
Like, will the structure of the companies in themselves become a competitive advantage? Will like companies that have a more flexible workforce be able to leapfrog over their competitors that forced everyone back in? I don't know. That's what's so fascinating about it. I mean, right now, the last statistics I've said is only somewhere around 40-ish%. I've seen a few different statistics, but it always hovers right in that 40% range. Of companies have made a permanent move to hybrid, or like, as they define, like a permanent move to remote or hybrid. So that still leaves a big portion of the workforce that either want everyone back in or
Yeah.
like have plans to bring everyone back in. So will we have enough use cases in industries where there are head-to-head competitors where one made one choice and one made another? I don't know, but
Yeah.
I'm definitely interested in where the
Yeah.
research starts to knit out. It's probably a little bit situational, a little bit industry specific, but it's so interesting. It's so
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Didn't Airbnb release and saying everybody can be remote, but every quarter we need to get together for a
Well, of course, Airbnb thinks that.
Yeah.
That's like the
That's
the
that.
cigarette industry, releasing releasing research about the benefits of smoking. Like they want people out and working remotely.
Use our website to find your next,
Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. So even if you are still in the office, or if it's this hybrid, or if it's totally remote, I think communication is always a key piece.
100%.
Yeah. So what have you seen that you can share to say, hey, this is actually something that worked really well, or actually was like just opened up that company, or opened up that organization to communicate much better?
Oh man, this is such an important point because we underestimate the value of internal communication amongst our employees and staff and other stakeholders. We put a ton of priority on external communication, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
marketing, on shareholder communication. Like we spend hours and hours and hours, and then we'll release like one memo to our employees and we think that actually covers it, when in fact I've been making the case we need to be at least as persuasive with our employees about we're moving in the right direction, we're making these decisions, and we're not making these, and have some level of transparency and consistency and repetition internally as much as we do externally, for all the reasons that you're talking about. Like we need to be able to bring people along. So we will actually, when we're doing engagements with our clients, build communication as a really important part of the tool set and start planning for communication up front, like even before we start doing implementation plans and all of that, like technical and project management type stuff with big change initiatives. We'll make sure communication is a big part of that. And the ones that I've seen do it really well usually start mapping out like they'll be really intentional about mapping out stakeholders in the organization to make sure that we are building persuasive messaging to our frontline people and our middle managers and our senior leaders and our board. And like they will actually think about what's the value prop for all those different audiences and communicate to them differently and use different mediums. It really depends. Sometimes internal, Slack groups, sometimes like actual board presentations. Like, of course, the medium matters, but thinking about all those audiences and what motivates them differently and what's the common vision across all of them about this change we are going through, I think is really, really important.
Yeah. But what about the attitude? Because you can always, sometimes you can spot, right, the resistance. It's either, their arms are crossed, or they don't say anything, or maybe they do say something.
Yeah.
And it's healthy. I think you need every flavor when you do this kind of change, because you need to listen to everyone. But what have you seen when you're like spotting this resistance? How do you hold their hand, or how do you turn them to actually to love the process or to love the change?
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it's actually a really healthy part of, discourse, to be able to disagree in reasonable ways. And what I found is there's two types of detractors. It's really important to try to distinct, or, really make it distinct about which kind of detractor you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because one is a really constructive detractor, where it's exactly what you're talking about. Like we're trying to sharpen this idea and make it better. I'm poking holes in how we are going to do this because I've seen it not work and I want to make sure it works. I want to understand the implications from me and my job and my team. Like they're asking questions, not to necessarily just be negative, but to make the idea ultimately better, to challenge it. And they're ultimately bought into the company's mission. They want to make sure we've thought through every angle. Yeah. And then there are people that are unconstructive detractors who are toxic, who have bought into all kinds of negative narratives about the organization and what's possible.
Yeah.
They're the kind of people that will repeat things that are just organizational defensive routines, like oh, that could never happen here. We will never be able to pull that off, speaking in those kinds of absolutes.
Yeah.
So it's really important to try to determine based on that person's motivation, like, why are they asking these kinds of questions?
Yeah.
Because the constructive detractors are really great to have at the table. Like,
Yeah.
those are people that we will target when we are thinking about who to build on a change team or a transformation team. We'll want those kinds of people, because if you can get those people bought into some kind of big innovation initiative, they are the ones that are going to immediately convince everyone else. Like, oh, if you got Caleb on board,
yeah,
then this is definitely something worth value, because I know he challenged it and looked at it from every angle,
Yeah. No. Yeah, no, it makes sense, but it takes time, right? It's not that you go in and then you flip the coin and then everybody is on the same page.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also helps with reflection and a lot of good, I'm sure, conversations as well. But
Yep.
you need to be a good moderator as well, so everybody can speak up and listen.
Yes.
And it's also, I'm sure there's also people that will sit there and saying, yes, we're in, but they're afraid of asking because they don't want to look stupid. They just want to, right? So how do you get everyone? And it's back to the culture, and culture is like it's like a buzzword, right? But it is that you need to be comfortable, right? And it's okay to ask, and it's okay not to say I don't know. And even know, because I've been in the meetings, right, where somebody's saying, just ask, right, and raise your hand, but you sit and you look around, and it's just not the same. So how do you, again, with your experience, what have you seen to get everybody on the same level, or getting everybody saying, hey, you can ask the good and the bad and the stupid questions?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're putting the nail on the head in terms of why we think about change in terms of internal politics.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and we think about change in terms of power mapping in the organization, because ultimately we have different people with different incentives and motivations. And we have all of these cultural considerations that will kill something before it can get, off the ground.
Yeah.
Just out of the interpersonal dynamics and the interpersonal relationships in the organization.
Yeah.
And so we try to map those out and understand them. And then a lot of the work that we do, we actually have built our methodology around the work that I did with President Obama in community organizing, because a lot of the work that we did in community organizing was exactly this type of work, right? Where we find people with leadership potential, we educate them about the issues, we have them go out and train other people about the issues and how to make the kind of change they want to see. We organize people in communities around making that kind of change. We get, the leadership and the people on the ground in conversation about what needs to happen. These are all things that we've learned from the political world, but actually, especially when you're talking about a large enterprise, are still applicable. And going back to that concept of a large organization as a social construct, we have to apply that kind of social thinking. And what's really fun from me coming from a digital background is we can amplify that and amplify the impact using technology and data. But it's still ultimately a people problem.
Yeah. That's good. You can't automate everything. What about, so what I've seen as well, and maybe it's observations, but I also felt it, that this change is coming. And an organization needs to be clear as well to say, we know this is going to shake up the organization. It's also going to take time for everybody to participate. So you have your job responsibility, right? This is what I do every day. And then suddenly, right, this needs to fit in as well.
Yeah.
Have you seen, how do I ask it? Because you want to succeed, right? We don't want to go under that statistic and just saying, it didn't work. Bummer. How do you get an organization or the leadership, right, to say, hey, you need to be aware what it really takes. It's not just a side project, or it's not just that side saying, okay, from 4 to 5, that's why you spend time on it. How do you get realistic about what it takes to succeed?
Oh God, we could spend a whole podcast on just that question, right? Because there's not an easy answer. I mean, it's leadership dependent. What's the makeup of leadership look like? Oftentimes you have certain people on the leadership team who are really bought into this change and this new direction, certain people who are resistors or detractors. And again, getting into their head and trying to figure out what the motivation is behind both, right? Like, because you can have people who are really gung-ho about it, and to your point, have no practical expectations about how long it's actually going to take. And you can have people who are detractors, but not actually logically detracting, just, trying to throw their weight around, or, have large egos in the room, or whatever reason it might be. And so you're trying to map that out a little bit for yourself as the consultant. But, I will say that it's really important to get the right team together to lead the change at all levels. And I think this is something that we've seen quite a bit, is that when we do have a really enthusiastic senior level sponsor of some big innovation initiative, it's really great, because the whole organization kind of realizes that's where you're going, but it doesn't necessarily mean you get that frontline buy-in on the details or the implementation, right? And it goes back to that McKinsey study about if we don't get the people who are actually doing the work bought in on this new direction, it's not really going to be successful. Let me give you one specific example, because this is something we've tackled in a few different contexts, which is the big idea of digital transformation, right? We can use technology to create new areas of value, new innovation initiatives, new products. We've done this in a few different ways with a few different clients. Sometimes it's launching a new product, new business service, but oftentimes it's some kind of efficiency we're creating with the new system, some kind of marketing automation, or new CRM, or whatever it happens to be with that organization. But the thing that we underestimate about technology is, again, all the cultural aspects around it. We can't just do the system implementation and then expect everyone to know how to do it, know what that means for their job, right? Not be afraid of it, because they know that this thing over here worked for many years, and now you're asking me to work a completely different way. There's lots of those kinds of considerations. So you could have a CMO, a CTO, or even a CEO over here talking about, we're going to innovate, we're going to create, all of these, we're moving into the future. They'll use this big kind of, language. And then you can have a lower level e-commerce manager, whoever it is, or, I work with a nonprofits. They'll have development people who are being asked to do more digital fundraising. And they're like, yeah, I mean, that all sounds great, but I don't really know how to do that. And I know I'm going to be held to my numbers. And so I'm just going to keep slyly doing this thing over here, So you don't see the behavior change that you actually want to see when it becomes very top down like that.
Okay. So what about, again, when, looking to the future a little bit, what kind of skills do you do you see that is really important to have in 5 to 10 years when you're doing this change management? Tell us about the future.
I love this question, because I always had debates with and again, I come from a digital strategy background, so I always have debates with my more tech-friendly friends about things like the need to code, or the need to, learn certain specific languages, or even when you look at things like data analytics, trying to forecast out where you're going to be able to find long-term efficiencies in those things, and where you're going to need very specialized skill sets is always really tough. So when I started my career 10-ish years ago, this was I was leading a digital strategy team, and I had tons of people saying, we got to teach people how to code, we got to build coding into STEM education. But you still see that quite a bit. But what you also see is that there are lots of plug and play type development suites now, where you can do 90% of what a coder could with just moving boxes around on a screen. Can even do app development without knowing how to code now. And so there's specialized things that we still really need that skill set for, like database management and really kind of complicated websites. But the vast majority of the public can build a website really easily now, where they couldn't 20 years ago, right? So trying to forecast out those kind of technical skills and trying to guess where things like data analytics, again, are going to be automated versus needing kind of specialized analytical skills. I always prioritize the things that are going to be timeless and aren't going to be automated anytime soon. So curiosity, creativity, critical thinking. It's one of the reasons why I love doing work in the org development and change management space, even though I come from a technology background, because I realize that the technology is always going to change, right? Like we're always going to be some new innovation. There's always going to be something new area of value that technology is going to create for an organization that is going to cause us to work completely different. What's not going to change is that people are going to resist it. We're going to need to train people up. We're going to need to build leadership capability around it. Like all of those things I think are really important. And so if I was giving advice, and I often am asked to give advice to people kind of entering the workforce, we prioritize those kinds of intangible things. Critical thinking skills, relationships, networking skills, creativity. Those are the kind of things that are much harder to replace.
You can't just YouTube that. Creativity.
100%.
I want to go back to what you said before with the tools and how you implement them. Have you, and I'm sure you have some, but I have to ask, have you seen it where, you implement this tool and in different teams that needs to use it, but suddenly it's like the ownership of it, it's difficult because everybody owns like a part, right? It could be a CRM system. It's like, no, that's somebody in sales implemented it. Oh no, marketing implemented it. And it's actually a tool for both, right? So what kind of advice have you seen? So it's like a we tool. No, so they both own it. Is it? Do they? I want to hear your input here.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it reminds me of a client project we did very recently where we were working with a product team, and I'm not going to name the client, but we discovered that, we discovered that a lot of the product decisions had been made, but no one could quite identify who made them. So we talked to like business folks, we talked to designers, UX strategists, we talked to marketing, we talked to technology, and everyone was kind of like, well, we just do what this department says. And then we're like, oh, well, we do that, but engineering is the one that really does it. And we realized that everyone was there was like a dysfunctional organizational thing happening where no one could really figure out who made the decision that they're all following. It was fascinating. I mean, in a perfect world, there's a product leader and an executive sponsor of any kind of big technology initiative, right? And so you've got ownership from a sponsorship level, and you've got ownership from an actual, like, in the weeds, like, I'm the one who knows all the details of this kind of big implementation. It doesn't always work like that because, obviously different organizations of different scales have different capacities. If you're not a tech, enabled firm or a tech company, even the word product carries with it different kinds of baggage. So, it really, there's usually a version of that at every organization. But if there isn't, especially if there isn't an actual like named product leader, or more often what I've seen is there is a named product leader, but it gets implemented and then that person leaves for whatever reason. And then it's kind of just held out in the ether and people forget why any of the decisions were made or like why it was implemented the way it was.
No. Well, that's good. I think I've just seen it, right? It's like the ownership of it, and it's just it's back to the communication as well, right? Communicate and understand why we're using this tool together.
100%.
So no. Okay, so we talked about the future. Let's look a little bit back. So if you have to, tell yourself or give yourself an advice and look like maybe 10 years ago, what kind of advice would you give yourself?
Besides for like fashion advice or
how
to raise kids,
right? And why? Like there's no recipe for that. Come on.
Because they have a 13-year-old now. I probably tell, when I have a 3-year-old, there's lots I would want to teach my old self.
Be more patient. No.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a good question. I mean, I definitely think I had a naivete about the impact of technology on society and business that it would always be positive. And I think that this partly comes out of my experience working in politics, but even after that, I think I've become much more sober about, this can go either way, and it can go either really wrong or really right very quickly.
Yeah.
When we don't think about the cascading effects of technology on business, on society, or on our own individual mental health, for example.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I think I would teach my younger self to be a lot more sober about. I think that I would put more investment in training myself in certain areas around, what am I thinking? Let me see if I can put this into words. Around long-term relationship development. Like I think it was about 10 years ago for myself in my own career where I started to prioritize networking more.
Yeah.
And started to really like prioritize it in a way where it wasn't just collecting a lot of names on paper. Like there's a lot of people on LinkedIn, for example, where they're just trying to get as many connections as possible.
Yeah.
But I've always tried to prioritize quality over quantity. I think that I started doing that about 10 years ago when I realized that, oh man, there's so many people I can get to know on the internet, but there's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And there's so many people I can go to a networking event and learn and get to know, but that also has a lot of noise.
Oh yeah.
So how do I like do scale while maintaining quality? Like get to know people like you who are brilliant and like somebody I want to know for a long time, and maintain relationships with them over time using technology, whereas it would have been hard to do that in previous eras. I think that I would have started doing that earlier in my career, because the net benefits of that over time just accumulate, right? Like you get to
but technology has also changed a lot, right? Over the last 10 years to make it
100%.
Easier to have a connection that's like worldwide, right? So that helps you as well.
I mean, this is again, pandemic leaps and bounds forward, right? And on that exact thing in terms of our comfortability, just made up a word, comfortableness, comfort. Friday afternoon brain. Our comfort with being on Zoom or doing these kinds of virtual meetings. I think that's helped create, new areas of value for that kind of global collaboration.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, no, I with my network as well, I'm so happy that everybody's getting used to technologies in just different ways. But I have a lot of different apps on my phone because everybody's using, different apps, right? But again, it makes it just much easier.
I imagine you have a really interesting perspective on that as more of a global citizen, right? Like seeing how it happens here in the States, where we tend to be a little insular versus, I've got clients that I've worked with in Dubai and really interesting contacts in Australia and Brazil, and like the technology they rely on, the cultural differences with the technology. It's just so fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think so. From Europe, right? You cannot write a check there, but here you can still write a check. Yeah.
So I wish you couldn't. Sometimes I'm like, why were you still doing this? But
right. Come on, let's leave that into the future as well. No. So if there's any of the listeners that want to reach out to you or find you, how can they find you?
CalebGardner.com is probably the best way. There's, you can connect with me across social media there. I'm probably ridiculously, honestly easy to get a hold of on any given day on like Twitter, for example, which I'm at Caleb Gardner. But yeah, that's kind of my central hub these days. It talks about my speaking, my book, my, day-to-day consulting work. So
you'll find there. Okay, perfect. And I will add that to the show notes, and I will also put it on the mindinnovation.com, so it's easy to find. So thank you so much, Caleb, for being here today. It was, this was fun. This was fun to talk about the change, because it's not easy. And I don't think that's not a one answer to everything here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
If you enjoy this podcast, maybe you'd like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Be sure also to check out our website, mindtheinnovation.com. And remember, stay curious and keep learning.